On episode 159 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, we speak to strategy expert Dan Bruder, and he's going to tell you how you can align your culture, strategy, and execution to achieve success. And that's exactly what you want as a leader. It's all about alignment today, folks. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, it's so great to have you here. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and thanks for tuning into yet another episode of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. You know where you can find us, just like I said at the intro, at movingforwardleadership.com. The podcast is Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. I believe this is episode 3 of the new name now, but the business, the brand still remains Moving Forward Leadership, all about helping you become that leader you're meant to be in those three domains of leadership. So thanks for coming out. So today we are talking about culture, strategy, execution, effectively everything that goes on inside your organization, and 3 things which are high on your priority list as a leader, as a senior leader within your organization. You see, competitive advantage and financial gain has become widely accepted strategy priorities for companies. Many companies invest in professional development for their employees and support volunteer and charity programs, but yet very few of them actually incorporate into the company's core focus, outcomes, and actions, let alone its true purpose for being a business. That's why you need to align all these things. So that's why I brought Dan Bruder on the show. You see, he is the CEO of Fusion Dynamics Group, which is an international strategy and leadership consulting firm. He's accomplished all kinds of stuff from executive leadership, strategic planning, entrepreneurship, sales, marketing, etc. And he developed his own system revolving around what he refers to as the blendification system. So it's a series of workshops and keynotes where he discussed blending culture, strategy, and execution to help companies, individuals, and communities realize their potential. And as peak performers, peak leaders, you know you want to be doing this. So we go into topics today such as, what the blendification system actually is, why organizations don't look at this type of strategy, how you can use system intelligence and what that is, as well as an execution model to ensure your success so that you're not just left out there on a limb by yourself. You got it all today, folks. And this episode is definitely bringing the goods for you. So I think that is enough for me. So why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Dan Bruder on how you can blend your culture, strategy, and execution. Hey, Dan, man, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. So good to have you here today.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Scott.
So we're talking about your book, The Blendification System. Super comprehensive, super in-depth, book, which I actually enjoyed immensely. And it's funny because I feel like it felt like it really fitted with the theme here that I go with at moving forward leadership, and bringing like the complete leadership podcast for the listeners out there, because I find a lot of podcasts that are focusing on certain aspects of leadership, but they don't really give the whole thing. They kind of niche really down, whereas I'm trying to give the whole picture to the listener. So this fit it really well. I guess first question I want to dive into is, why don't we start off with you? Who you are, where you come from, a little bit about yourself, so the audience gets a little understanding who Dan, not Daniel, but Dan Bruder is. And we're just having a little conversation before we hit record, audience, about how just confirm name as I always do. And he was like, no, it's definitely not Daniel. That's something my publisher wanted me to put in. I go by Dan. No one ever calls me Daniel. So anyway, Dan, why don't we have some fun? Let's dive in there, and then we'll get into the brunt of the conversation.
Yeah, well, I guess a little bit of background, more personal. I kind of grew up as an athlete. So I grew up in Florida and played football because that's what you did in Florida, right? Everybody plays football down there. So in high school, I was all state in Florida, but I didn't really have a position. I started 5 different positions. So I played quite a few different positions. Every time the coach needed somebody, like, hey, somebody's hurt, start this position. And later on, in life, I've stayed with the whole athletic thing. So I stayed pretty physically fit. Done several Ironman, several marathons. I actually broke, I'll laugh at this for a second, but I broke the world record for the vertical feet snowboarded without the use of power. So that means that you've actually hiked up and snowboarded down for 24 hours. So over the course of 20, I broke the world record. I didn't say I set the world record. I just broke it because the guy whose record I broke actually set a higher record the same time I broke his previous record. So that's my claim to fame, but nobody knows anything about it. He actually set a better record and beat me that day. But it was a fun, long, hard 24 hours. But the reason why I share that is because it, the intensity in life, the desire to do something special, to make an impact, to really pursue our potential. So whether that be in athletics, whether that be with our families, whether that be in our personal life or our life as a whole, that's really something that has driven me for years. It's like, what can we do? I mean, these humans, we've been put on this earth to do something special. Let's go figure it out. What can we actually do? What's our potential? So athletically, I've always been trying to push my body, and now my body's pushing back a little bit, but I've pushed to see what I can actually accomplish. And in the professional side, I've tried to take that same attitude into work. Is what can we do with our work? Because you look at what we do, we spend most of our waking time in work or work-related activities. So if we're going to realize our potential as a human being, it probably needs to constitute something about work. So we look at work and kind of going back. When I was young, I came out of college with a finance degree and went into banking. And pretty quickly, at 26 years old, I was with a small bank, and the holding company CEO said, "Hey, will you go start another bank?" So I was president of a bank at 26 years old. I had no idea what I was doing. But I was like, sure, let's go do it. Let's have fun. And the truth is, underneath all that, I was super nervous. I had no idea what I was doing. And looking back, I kind of failed. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I didn't want anyone to know that I didn't know, but I didn't really know anything that was going on. I was just kind of learning on the fly. So it was a really interesting experience to just go do something and learn. The title was nice and everything, but the truth is I was way over my head, and didn't know how I could actually create something special. So I left banking several years after that and went into the resort business. And over the time that I was, after banking and before I went out on my own, I really just said, hey, what are all the different things that I can accomplish in work? So I was initially in corporate finance with a big company, Fortune 500 company. Then I went into corporate marketing, corporate sales. Then I ran a site. It was in the hospitality industry. So I kind of did everything, and it goes back to, when I was in football, I was like, hey, I'll do anything. Just put me out there. And I really got a lot of experience, senior levels. And then in 2008, went out on my own, mostly because we had a recession back then. And it really forced me to do some decision making, and started my own consulting practice. And I've been really consulting since then. And I've also picked up teaching. So I teach at two universities as well, University of Colorado at Boulder, as well as Colorado State University in the executive MBA and MBA programs. So it's kind of like this world is just this petri dish to try different things, do different things, and see what we can actually do and push the limits. And that kind of led me to writing a book about this stuff. But it wasn't really a book about my life. It was a book about how do we do this in business. So that's just a little bit of insight in my background personally as well as professionally.
Oh, that's awesome. I love the little quick story about being put in charge of a bank at was it 26 years old?
Yeah.
I remember when I got, so by day I'm a senior Canadian Army officer, so I've commanded various levels, and my first command was a transport platoon of which turned out to be 80 something soldiers, and I was like probably around, no, not even 26, I was probably around 24 years old at the time. Same thing, like I don't have a clue what I'm doing. I'm just gonna figure this out on the fly and listen to those senior NCOs who's got just as many years of military experience as I had life at that point. But managed to slog through it, and that's kind of what us as leaders we do, right? We figure it out. We listen to those with the experience and push forward. But I love your passion for just making things better, improving things, and getting things done at the same time. And kind of hinted, as you were talking, I could see the background of the book just coming more and more to play, and it was like, oh, here we go. Because always there's a question of what was the inspiration behind the book, but I kind of feel like I already know the answer of that, and that was all these experiences that you had going through your career, and then finally to the point where you're like me at some point is like, no, I got to take all these experiences and put it down for others to benefit from, not just me.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if you look at, the book's called Blendification, and the idea behind that is that when we blend things together, we get better outcomes. And we can't be the best human being by doing just one simple thing. There's being a lot written about complex theory, complex organizational theory. And I think over the years, what has happened is we've tried to dumb business down to one simple thing, and that happens to be profit or return on shareholder wealth. And while that's important, don't get me wrong, that's not why businesses exist. There's several different things that businesses impact. It's our employees, our customers, our communities. So we really need to look at business as a tool to do much more. And I think if we look at what's going on in the world, we really need to look at this world as being more blended as opposed to more segregated or separated.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. We're becoming more and more connected and not
Yeah.
more and more divided, unlike some certain individuals want to think and act like. But let's dive into the book a little bit, shall we? And so you kind of hinted at it, but let's get deeper on this. And what is actually the blendification system? Uh, uh, you
Well,
know?
there's a concept for blendification. I did a TED talk a few years ago, actually several years ago now, and it was around this idea of blendification. And if you go back to this whole thing with football that I shared with you, I mean, it was really about understanding all the different roles on the team and being able to succeed in each one. And then in my corporate world, in my life, it was able to be, corporate finance, all these things. And what I found is that blending things together and having good understanding, the ability to do well in multiple areas actually is a good thing. um, so if we look at the book, it really evolved from the TED Talk, and the TED Talk was really about a blended world, and it focused on blending together work and home life. So building a better work life will actually build better communities, and that was the concept around the TED Talk. But when I looked at it from a book perspective, I had been building a process for several years within my practice and teaching at the universities that took companies from identifying what their culture was, defining that, and then building strategic platforms that align with the culture, and then also creating an execution model or an operating model that aligned with those two things. So at the end of the day, the book is really about combining and connecting or blending culture, strategy, and execution so that we as individuals and we as a company collectively can pursue and realize our potential as a human being. And it goes back to that idea that we spend most of our time at work or work-related activities. And the truth is most of us have a job. So if we're going to pursue our potential, it has to be something at work. And leaders at work have to take on the responsibility to develop their people by further connecting their culture, strategy, and execution. And that's really what the book is about. It's a specific step by step, really an operating manual for developing culture, strategy, and execution so that we can do a better job as human beings through our work that better impact our employees, customers, and communities.
I love that idea. I often find when organizations are struggling, there's some kind of disconnect, whether that is a disconnect with strategy, there's a disconnect with culture, there's a disconnect with employee engagement, or the leadership style within the organization. And there always seems to be something that's not connected to the rest, and henceforth that's the reason that's causing these problems. And it's like, oh, once you connect these, i.e., once you connect your culture to for example, your business processes and the systems that you have in place, then you're actually going to operate at a higher level. So this is one of the things that really stuck out to me, and it clearly showed that the need for all these different aspects of blending together and working together and being one synchronous system for the organization, which is awesome. So from your experience, what's how do organizations not get connected in the first place? Because as we talk, like, it's evident to us, but how is it not evident to the other leaders out there that are running their companies and organizations?
Well, what I believe happens in organizations is the CEO or the leadership team has a really good idea what they want to do, and they have reasons for doing it. And they believe that some of the folks on their team have the same reasons, and that's not necessarily true. So what happens is the leadership team kind of identifies the future of the company, where it's going, but there's no process for taking that down to the individual operating level or to the people that aren't at the senior level. And I do see a lot where CEOs will spend, they'll spend all kinds of money in developing themselves. They'll go to this, weekend long excursion up in the mountains somewhere where they're, going on a hike and someone's really challenging them. Then it costs them $20,000, $30,000. But then when it comes time to develop the people in the company, they're afraid to spend $100. And they're constantly investing in themselves and their close leadership team, but that doesn't really transcend the organization. All that does is help a few people at the top get better. So when we really look at this, my model is like, we got to turn this thing upside down. We got to break this. And not necessarily saying that we should be spending all kinds of money on everybody in the organization, but why don't we build a model in a company that fundamentally connects why we're doing something, our potential as an organization, then build a business plan to do it, and then make sure that everybody that's working on something realizes that their work is strategically significant and that strategy will lead to something special. So I believe that leaders and companies don't really take back and look at the true potential of their organization and then build an organization that pursues that potential. What they do is they say, hey, we need to grow by what? 5% next year. Everybody, that's our goal. Let's go do it. And I'm like, why? Who cares? 5%. I got kids to feed, right? COVID. I got all these things happening, but why do we're not able as leaders to translate why the company exists into the terminology so that people can actually show up at work with some level of motivation. And it's one thing to sit here, Scott, and talk about this. It's another thing to actually do it. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and they had gone through my strategy component, and then they hired another consultant to do culture. And I'm like, why would you do that? I was like, your strategy and your culture need to be completely in sync. So if you set your culture up over here, and then you have a business strategy or plan that's completely different, you can't really maximize or complement your culture. So we had some conversations around you can't do this separately. And you ask the question, like, why don't they do it? I think it's like the book of the month or something. It's like, hey, so and so wrote a book on culture. Let's go do this. And then they pass that around, they read it, and nothing ever happens. And then they come up with strategy. Oh yeah, it's coming around September. We need to start planning our strategy for next year. Call up somebody to facilitate a meeting, but they're not really looking at strategy as a leadership tool or culture as a leadership tool. And I think they really struggle with the fact that these things all need to be united. And I don't know if they see it, because if they knew it, they'd do it, right? Unfortunately, I think they just look at culture as being this thing that they talk about in board meetings, or when they're being interviewed by writers or podcasts or something. It's not anything that we actually really enliven, and we make it part of the DNA of the organization. Same thing with strategy and the execution model. So I just don't think they really look at the potential, and see how they can actually build their company to be something special.
I love it. It's so funny because it's so true. It's just like, hey, let's work on culture. And it's like, oh, we'll look at it and we'll discuss it. But then it's like, once it gets tough, then it's like, oh, no, I know. That was good. We'll just, I got to push it off a little bit. We got to delay this meeting. And all of a sudden, before you know it, they're back to doing exactly what they've been doing all along. As a saying in the military goes, when you don't know what to do, you do what you know. And that's what ends up happening. And they're like, because they hit that pain point of, oh, this is going to be tough if we want to change. Well, do we want to go through? I got enough stuff to worry about. I don't feel like worrying about changing my culture right now. So they end up just sloughing it off. But it's so right. Like you got to dive into. You can't just, take one book, look at it and go, okay, cool, pass it around and expect results to change. You got to push that from the top. The leaders that are listening here, you got to drive that organizational change and culture. And I shook my head when you told me about that consultant being hired to, do one, you follow one person for one stage, but then you turn around and hire someone else for another. That makes absolute no sense. When you have a system like this, you need someone to guide you right through the whole process, because you can't chop this up. You can't just go, okay, we'll look at systems and then we'll look at culture and then we'll look at the other part, next month or whatever, because it all goes together. Hence the name blendification.
Yeah, it's the action of blending things together. Yeah, you meant, military. I mean, you look at the military, there is complete focus on every aspect, every component of every process is connected. It's like you know that this leads to this leads to this, and everything just is aligned. My daughter's in the military as well, and boy, has she grown tremendously by that experience. And but that's I just look at it and go, holy cow! There's just so much more we can do if we just connect things intentionally. COVID is interesting. You look at what happened with COVID, and that what you said made me think about that. About if you don't know what to do, you do what you know. I saw so many companies. I don't know about you and what you've seen out there. As soon as COVID hit, they just threw everything away, and they
Yeah.
just went right back to the basics, which might have been a good thing to do, but they lost culture, development, engagement. They lost so many different things, and they just went back to the basics. Now, a lot of that's changed since then. That was only 9 months ago, but it did really wake some people up and really put some people to sleep at the same time.
You could tell which organizations had the leaders who were ready for adversity, ready to adapt, ready to overcome with the mindset, and push through this thing. See the opportunity, vice see the threat that COVID presented, right?
Yep.
And adjust at their systems, adjust at their culture, adjust at the execution of their businesses on almost a dime, essentially, because one day everything was fine and the next day everything was started to be shut down. So it was just that fast up here in Canada. So the leaders out there, you have to be ready for these circumstances. You have to think about it. You can't sit back and go, well, I don't know. Let's see how this goes.
Well, you got the title, moving forward. You don't move forward by going backwards.
That is true. Never even the title actually. That wasn't made that angle, but I like it still. Pushing forward, because the title actually is more aligned with continuous improvement, the moving forward aspect. But I like that too. So one aspect of your book that I want to dive more into, people, we all know about cognitive and emotional intelligence and stuff like this, but you actually go deeper. you go into system intelligence. So for the listener out there, system intelligence, what the heck is that? So like another form of intelligence I gotta be aware of. Like before there used to be just intelligence, but now we got cognitive and emotional. But let's dive into system, because that really piqued my interest as I was going through it.
Yeah, and I think you're referring to the leadership intelligence pyramid, and really the structure around that is that there's three very different types and related types of intelligence: cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence, and system intelligence. Now, most people are familiar with cognitive intelligence, our IQ. Some people say that we stopped developing our IQ at the age of 8. I hope that's not true. But I still think I can learn a little bit more. And then there's the emotional intelligence, having empathy, being able to put myself in your situation, more that one-to-one type thing, having empathy for people. And then we have this thing called system intelligence. And I put that at the top of the pyramid because it's like once we graduate from emotional intelligence, where do we go from there? And it really becomes system intelligence. And that's looking at not only how I impact you through my actions and my behaviors, but how I impact you and then you impact others. And in a business context, it's how my marketing and sales is leading or impacting my product, and how my product is impacting my operations, and how my operations is impacting my people. So if we have a strategy within an organization, we say, hey, we need to expand our business to the Southeastern United States. And we need to go do this. This is the market. And usually what happens is, the sales and marketing team says, let's go down there. We're going to go down there. We're going to be down there selling within the next 6 months. And they go do it. And then the product team's going, what just happened? Unfortunately, the product that we're selling in the mountains doesn't sell very well in Florida. And so what we have is a lack of system intelligence, the inability to see across the entire organization and the systematic impact of our decisions. So we need to really look at the systematic impact. So, what am I doing as a leader? If I'm leading marketing and sales, I can't go forward without including the product people and engaging them. I can't go forward without including the manufacturing people, if it's a manufacturing group, or the people itself, the culture of the company. Is my culture really up for that? So leadership to me is about system intelligence, which you need to have emotional intelligence, because we need to spend time understanding what people think, but we need to understand what they think, how they feel in the context of how are we impacting everybody? How are they impacting everybody? How are our strategies impacting multiple different layers, multiple different functions within an organization? And then at the same time, we can't not have cognitive intelligence. We can't be just dumb, right? We have to have some level of cognitive intelligence. So to me, it's not just, choosing one. So Daniel Goleman back in the 90s really made emotional intelligence popular. And one of the things he said is that emotional intelligence is more important than cognitive intelligence. And I thought myself is like, well, if you had to choose one, maybe, but do we have to choose one? Why don't we choose all three, and blend them together? And if we're really trying to build the perfect leader, I think that leader would have cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence, and system intelligence. And the good news is we don't have to choose one. This isn't multiple choice. This is life.
It's tough being alone as a leader. You're often in situations where you're not sure where to go. You're not sure what's the best decision. Yet, as Colin Powell once said, it's lonely at the top. And reality is, it takes time. Sure, you can read books and listen to podcasts such as this one, but nothing beats experience. But who has time for experience when you're at a situation right now that requires experience to lead yourself, your team, your organization through? That's where coaching comes in. You see, coaching enables you to unlock the experience in others. Right here, right now, you have 20 years of military service, plus 150 plus episodes of interviews and topics and research sitting at your disposal. So what are you waiting for? Are you ready to level up your game, become that leader that you know you're meant to be? Are you ready to go to the next level? If so, drop me a line, scott@movingforwardleadership.com, or swing by the website and book a discovery call through movingforwardleadership.com/book. And let's get you moving in the right direction, leading better, leading more effectively today, right here, right now. Starting off with leading yourself. And then let's focus on how you can build your high-performing team to drive your organization's output higher, faster, harder. Today. Not next week, not next month, but today. All right, folks, that's it. Now let's get back to the show. Love it. It's so funny, as you were talking there, I had the example of Target's expansion into Canada in my mind, because it was a complete failure. Why? Because the leadership team down there assumed that Canadians wanted exactly the same stuff as our American friends, which didn't happen.
Yeah.
Right. So our shopping habits up here are, they're very similar. Don't get me wrong, but they're also a little bit different, and different enough to the point where it didn't take people away from the other established competition. It didn't take people away from Walmart. It didn't take people away from then Sears. Sears is now defunct completely, but it didn't take people away from these other companies. Why? Because when they went there, either the prices weren't going to, weren't to the point where, oh, I'll buy it at Target vice Walmart, or it just wasn't there on the shelf in the first place. So it was that whole miss of the systems intelligence aspect, the cultural aspect, the emotional aspect, the cognitive, actually doing analysis. Often there wouldn't be products on the shelves because they didn't do the analysis properly of the shipping times up here, because it takes longer to get from one place to another in Canada. We don't have the massive extensive road network that you have in the States. Why? Because, well, it's a hell of a lot rockier. It's a lot less populated, and where it is populated, it's a hell of a lot more densely populated. The going joke is, where do you get when you drive in Toronto for an hour? Well, you get to Toronto because you haven't moved.
Yeah.
Right. So they didn't take any of this in consideration. And then, was it 6-8 months later, they were like, oh, we're closing shop. We're done. Because they didn't look at it from that systems perspective.
Well, that's a great example. And then they blame it on, they'll probably blame it on, well, Canada's not a good market for us. But the truth is Canada's probably a really good market for us if we were able to do the analysis, like you said. And we start blaming others for the faults, blaming others for our mistakes. And unfortunately, that's what happens. And we avoid some really good opportunities. Like, that's a pretty big market up in Canada. And all we needed to do is do our research and understand the impact and what we need to modify from a customer and market, product, operations, and people perspective. And if we do that, we probably succeed. But that doesn't always happen. And that I think that's a good example of system intelligence. And it happens all the time. Usually it's one CEO that stands up and says, we're going to go do this, and everyone goes rah rah rah, and they find out that we didn't really research this very well. Just trust me.
No, you're right. Canada as a whole was very excited, I would think, overall excited for Target coming, because there's a lot of Canadians who will cross the border to go to Target. Back in the day when we could, crazy to say that right now, but back in the day when we could just cross the border and go shopping for the day or the weekend or whatever, a lot of Canadians would go to Target in the States and do a lot of shopping or bring stuff back. But what they didn't realize is, they didn't go, okay, well, we can't just go and basically copy and paste the stores. We have to actually think about this. And they didn't go through that analysis. You're right. They could have came up here and absolutely crushed it if they had done the research and done their homework and adjusted more on the fly. But it took them way too long to adjust. It took them way too long to adapt to what the situation actually was. And in the end, they're like, oh, yeah, Canada's not a good market. We're gonna accept our losses and cut our losses and run type thing.
Bad strategy. No, that was a bad strategy, bad idea, but it was really bad execution.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad right across the board. So much more. So Dan, in implementing this, this whole blendification system, where do you find organizations, have, where they lose focus? Is it at the beginning in preparation, or is it execution, or is it, linking the different aspects together? Where is it that they're going to get hooked up, the worst?
Yeah, I think what I see happen is companies and leaders are very excited to jump on and redevelop or develop an intentional culture. And I see the same thing with strategy. They're very excited to get, a group of 10 or 15 leaders together, 20 leaders together, and develop a strategic platform. Where it falls off is the execution side of this. And they think that they can just come back and circulate a PowerPoint and everybody gets it. Um, and that's where it really falls off. So, and I knew that going into this. So that's why I created an execution model. It's really a model that I use this thing called roots groups, and it's really creating change at the grassroots level. So if we have a culture or a strategy that's really important, or a direction we want to go as an organization, it's not going to happen unless we can create or embed this within the grassroots of the organization. So that's why I created roots groups, and now they own the execution of the strategy, which drives towards the culture. So what I see happen is organizations don't do a really good job in disseminating and engaging most people in the company in the strategic execution of something important. So there was a company, a big company. I can't share their name, so it's not good. But they hired a large national, international consulting company to do strategy. And this was about a $4 billion company. And they spent with this large consulting company roughly 9 months going through strategic planning. And what happened is this group came in and brought all kinds of MBAs from Harvard and all these types of people, and they did all kinds of interviews and created all kinds of analysis. And at the end of that, they delivered an awesome PowerPoint presentation, an awesome deck. And they had identified 8 strategic objectives. And they said, leadership team, which I think this leadership team was roughly 10 people, an executive committee. And they said, here's our recommendations in this PowerPoint. Give me $2.5 million, true dollar amount, by the way. And they said, here's the 8 strategic objectives, and go figure it out. And what happened is they got this PowerPoint. Of course, it came. I mean, there was all kinds of really good research. I'm not undermining the research, because it was tremendous research on markets, futures, all kinds of different things. And then they delivered this PowerPoint. They did an awesome presentation, and then they went away. And this PowerPoint sat for about 3 months before the executive committee got to it in their next quarterly meeting. And they said, okay, executive team, let's come together. Let's talk about strategy. So now they started talking about it, and they said, okay, now let's go ahead and see how we can actually start executing on this. You take this objective, you take this objective. So they all kind of just divvied up the objectives, and they were supposed to put this together. Now that's 3 months. So another 3 months goes by when they come back to talk about what they were doing. And they said, well, we made some progress here, didn't make some progress there. And then come back in 3 months. So now what happens is about 9 months went by. And the truth is that all of that research that was done was starting to become less relevant. And what happened is they lost the ability to execute immediately. They didn't have an agile execution model, because the markets start changing. And we don't need COVID to tell us that things change very rapidly. And unfortunately, what happened with these people is that $2.5 million was spent on really, really good, valuable research that was very effective in the moment, but it didn't really create a model that adapted to changing times. And of course, when COVID came, there was companies that had no idea. They took their strategic platform, they threw it away. It's like, this doesn't matter. And I was like, no. Your strategic outcomes still matter. How you get there will change. Your strategic actions will change. And yeah, unfortunately for this company, they didn't spend $2.5 million wisely. I worked with one of their subsidiaries, poor little me, right? Worked with one of their subsidiaries, and we went through this blendification system for a much lower price, and we were able to turn it around within a month. And the main thing we did, which relates back to your question, is that we created an agile execution model so that our strategy could live on. And that's where I think people fail. They fail in the execution. We know that intuitively that execution really falls. But do we actually have a model to execute? I mean, a real legitimate step-by-step approach that engages multiple people in the company.
I love so much of that there. That was fantastic. Wow. Yeah, that's such a great story. So many leaders out there, you're right, they just fail in execution. They're like, yep, get this great report, throw it to the side. I'm just going to keep doing what it is I've been doing for a while, and then we'll revisit. And you hit the nail on the head that things change so fast. Like I often say to guests as a point, and I'll say it again, like, things might have changed just a matter of course of this podcast that we listen to. We don't know. The world is constantly changing. And the leaders out there, they need to be adaptive. They need to be agile, like you said, to adapt and react and adjust to the changes that are going on. You can't just sit back, go, well, let's just see how this is going to pan out, because it's not going to pan out. That isn't a strategy. That's not execution. That is simply hoping. And as we say in the Army, hope's not a COA, or acronym for a course of action, i.e. an option. You just can't hope things are going to get better. You just can't hope that you're going to win the battle, or win, execute and win whatever it is whatever battle it is in the business world that you're fighting right now. Maybe that's customer retention. Maybe that's expansion. Maybe that is literally trying to stay alive. You just can't hope for it. You have to execute and get a plan and execute relentlessly on that plan, but allowing for flexibility to adjust when you realize adjustments need to be made.
Yeah, and your military experience is tremendous, because in military both sides have plans, right? But one plan's not one or even both plans aren't going to work. I think, was it Mike Tyson gets his credit for everybody's got a plan till they get punched in the mouth?
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that true in military? I mean, does anything go according to plan? It never does. We've got to adapt. We've got to change. And I think military is really, really good. They just like, okay, we're here. We need to pivot to this, and they go. I mean, it's really, it's great experience for you to have that, because I think the military, the way they approach things are like, sure, we've got a plan, but we know that it's not going to be perfect. I don't know if business does that. I mean, there are businesses that do this very, very well. Don't get me wrong, but I think business, they plan not necessarily to execute. They plan because that's what they're supposed to do every year, um, and that's what I've seen. It's like, oh, my board of directors require that I do a strategic plan every year. Oh, really? That's motivating,
So what do you do with it? Oh, it gets tossed into the filing cabinet and forgotten about. No, you're right. We our saying is no plan survives contact with the enemy, as you said. But in the business world, what's the enemy? COVID is the enemy. A new competitor is the enemy. Change, price fluctuation, maybe a supplier. Those things, you look at that's the enemy. So you have to be able to adjust. You have to be able to go on the fly and suddenly go, okay, the plan isn't 100% relevant anymore, but we still, what still works, what doesn't, how can we adjust and continue forward towards your mission? Damn, man, this has been a great talk. As we wind down, is there any of the big aspects that we didn't hit from the book, or anything we didn't cover that you feel like we really should cover before we wind down here now?
Well, it's really, the book is about a whole systematic process. So, when I set out to write a book, I had already had this operating system in several companies and teaching it in the MBA programs. But when I started writing the book, it was really about writing something that somebody could get the book and fundamentally change their company, and doing that by enhancing the lives of their people, their customers, and their communities. It's more of an operating manual, step by step. And the thing we use in there, I created this thing called the strategy whiteboard. And the strategy whiteboard is really a 2-page tool that we use to document our culture, our strategy, and our execution. And that is really the model that the whole book is based on. It's really the strategy whiteboard, and that's the connective tool. And if we look at strategy, it's really that bridge between culture and our operations and our execution. So that's where the strategy whiteboard comes into play. And it's just really a model for people to follow to build their culture, strategy, and execution within an organization. And that's kind of the model. That's what I follow in the book, and that's what I use in the business. And it's there's other models out there, but if you look at it and if you really dig into the book, there's emotional intelligence embedded in it. It's color coded around various different emotional intelligence tools. So it's not just kind of a bland black and white two-dimensional strategy thing. It's about really using emotional intelligence, system intelligence, and building it into a document that we can all use. I think that's what we're really looking for.
No, that's so true. It's awesome. Great way to wrap up the show. As we wind down here now, do got a couple of last questions for you. One, which I asked all the guests here at Moving Forward Leadership. That is, according to you, Dan Bruder, what makes a great leader?
Well, I think it goes right back to the system intelligence, the ability to see how my behaviors, habits, and actions impact not only the people that are right in front of me, but the people that they work with, their peers, their colleagues, their family, their friends, because I believe that work not only has an impact on the employee, it has an impact on the people at home. So it has a generational impact because usually they have kids. So how you show up or you come home from work, not necessarily get off a Zoom call today, uh, how you show up after that impacts generationally. It has a relational impact because it impacts, spouses, significant others. So work is a really important component to our social fabric within all of our communities. And that's why I say system intelligence is really what it's all about.
Awesome. Love it. Love it so much. And then finally, how can people find you? How can they follow you? Feel free to give yourself a shameless plug. It's all about you right now,
Yeah,
man.
well, I have a website that's blendification.com or blendificationsystem.com, and you can find more information about that. On my website, you can watch videos that summarize my book. You can get my book at Amazon. You can also get a link to Amazon from my website. You can watch my TED Talk. If you just Google Dan Bruder TED Talk, you'll see my TED Talk out there. So there's a lot of different resources. And on my website, there's several free resources that actually support the book. So it's not just the book. I have a series of a video e-learning platform there too. So that's a good way to get a hold of me. And then I have a contact page there. If anyone says, hey, tell me a little bit more about this, they can reach out that way.
For you, the audience, no need to Google or anything. Just go to movingforwardleadership.com/159, and all those links are in the show notes already for you. So again, 159, 159. Damn it. Thanks for so much for coming out, talking to me. Love absolutely everything you had to say. I love the comprehensive approach to this. And for the audience listening, like, we didn't even touch the tip of the iceberg of this thing. Like it is really in depth, the book, and it is actually a great read. So do go out and check out the copy, and that as well is in the show notes for you. So Dan, again, thanks for coming out and taking your time to speak to me and the audience today.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott. This has been fun. I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend, win-win all around. And hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.